Morning, everybody. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Today's Future of New York conversation is called Creating the State's New Cannabis Industry in partnership with BPCM Cannabis. Really want to give a huge thank you to Lisa Gabor, who's a partner at BPCM Cannabis, for helping convene us all and helping pull together this amazing group of panelists and really helping co-produce. So first of all, hat tip to Lisa. Morning, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Lee. I'm a principal in the business strategy group at Capalino and the leader of our cannabis advisory group. So we're here to talk about the legalization of the adult recreational cannabis market and program in New York. It's a huge development economically as well as from an equity standpoint. This industry is projected to have 3.7 billion in sales by the year 2025. It's going to bring so many business opportunities. It's also going to bring some much needed reinvestment into communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs. A little bit on us. As you may know, Capalino is the leading urban strategy team in New York. We recently launched the cannabis advisory team. That's built upon years of work that we've done with advocates and with entrepreneurs to finally move this forward in the New York marketplace. So our team does everything in terms of regulatory and market entry for new businesses. Our team combines expertise in land use, permitting, business strategy, social responsibility, community engagement, and more. We help these companies and our clients drive business strategy and address the social equity components that are going to be an integral part of this industry. So I'm thrilled to join the panelists today. Let me briefly introduce everyone, then we'll jump in. We've got Imani Dawson, who's the executive director of the Cannabis Education and Advocacy Symposium and Expo. Hey, Imani. Melany Dobson, chief product officer at Hudson Hemp. Lisa Gabor, I mentioned, partner at BPCM Cannabis and co-host of today's event. David Hershkovitz, writer and host of the Light Culture podcast and Man About Town. Kristen Jordan, executive director of the Asian Cannabis Roundtable. My colleague Tanisha Walker-Miller, who's a principal at Capalino, and myself. This is going to be a 1-hour panel. We're going to try to leave 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A. Feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A, and if we can get them along the way, we'll get to them, and then we'll certainly try to carve out some time at the end. So that was a mouthful. Jumping right in. Future of New York is the topic here. We are at a really exciting time for New York. You know, as a current New Yorker, as a native New Yorker, as a forever New Yorker, it's so exciting to see New York coming back to life after the pandemic. So many things are changing and reopening. There's a lot of optimism, and I think I can't help but feel, and hopefully my panelists feel the same way, that the new adult recreational market is part of that optimism. It's a whole new sector here, and it's a whole new opportunity. And so I think what we're looking to hear from my esteemed panelists are, you know, what kind of good is going to result from this new adult recreational cannabis market? Who's going to benefit? And what are the challenges? And what are the obstacles? And how do we grapple with that? So to get us kicked off, I want to first turn to David and Lisa. David, first, sort of give us some quick thoughts. What does New York look like? A transformed New York with a legal adult recreational cannabis. Give us your thoughts, David.
Well, you know, as Yogi Berra said, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. I definitely feel that. But then Abraham Lincoln said, the most reliable way to predict the future is to create it. So I think that's kind of where we're at with our conversation today. So, you know, lots of things to talk about here. One of them I think is very strong is the whole history of the war on drugs and stigmatization, which is going to be a lingering effect on the city with regard to people who, you know, maybe aren't in the cannabis world or don't like it or don't like how it smells. And I know I live downtown, and that's sort of like a free zone, and people are really already enjoying the freedom by the changed laws that allows people to smoke in public anywhere you're allowed to smoke a cigarette and walk on the street, which I think was one of the great ways to experience New York City. Personally, I find that really fun to be able to walk around, and that's already happening. However, I'm sitting today in Windsor Terrace in Brooklyn in a very family-oriented neighborhood, and I'm not quite sure what the reaction might be from various neighbors if you're sitting, you're allowed to drink a beer, you're sitting on your stoop and everything's fine, but if you're smoking a joint and there are kids next door. So I feel like there's a lot of education that still needs to be done, and we need, and the city needs, and everybody needs to just raise these issues and remind people that the war on poverty spent billions of dollars training us to believe that this is like a terrible substance, whereas now we know that was all just terribly wrong and led to all these terrible social injustices that we'll talk about coming up as well. So that's, one thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a real shot in the arm for the New York economy. And I know, there's many real estate opportunities. There's storefronts closed throughout the city. I don't think we could have found a better time in many ways to have this law enacted because of the situation in the city with the economy and the opportunities that this opens up. And, a lot of this is going on already. There are lounges, that are functioning currently underground. So, it's not as if all of this is suddenly going to be a new thing, but now it's going to come up above ground. And, to me, that's just, freedom and a freedom of expression, freedom to be able to just enjoy yourself in a very non-confrontational and, it's a very, I also believe in this sort of aura of this substance that's been used traditionally, medicinally, spiritually, throughout history for many thousands of years, that it has like a positive impact on community, that it does bring people together, that it is something that's actually going to enhance the life of New York beyond just sort of the recreational, experience of enjoying, the buzz or even the medical benefits of all of that.
That's great. That's great. And David, as a Windsor Terrace resident, I will have to follow up with you on your Windsor Terrace comment after this call.
Okay.
Lisa, anything you wanna add to those great comments that David just shared?
Well, I think I come at it from a little bit of a different place, but I would like to add on. And what I'd also like to say is how much I appreciate having this conversation right now, because we're in a bit of a liminal space in between when we know what's going to happen, but we don't know exactly how. And I love that this panel also is so far reaching between the specifics and the imagination on taking our ideas of where we each come to from our backgrounds and trying to cast this new industry in the best light. So I can take that from my point of view, which is what excites me about the future of New York from this point of view from cannabis is knowing how it's going to be, New York City so specifically is going to be a launch pad for the global cannabis industry. And the reason is because New York City is the cultural capital of the world. And we're so specific here because we have the world's cultural industries. We have art, we have fashion, we have music, we have design. And this is going to result in these new products that the world has never seen before. And what's so exciting, in addition to the fact that we have these, that we're going to see these new products, is the fact of who is going to see them, and that is tourists. New York is so special because we have people coming here from Tokyo and Tennessee, and they come for our museums, and they come to see our sports teams, and they come to spend money here. And they're going to come here and they're going to see our new and equitable industry, and they're going to have their most memorable life experiences, and they're going to go back to wherever they've come from, and they're going to be speaking about it. So they're going to be coming here, spending their money, they're going to be going on and on what we've created. They're going to be talking about what we've created and going back home, and we're going to be at the center of it all. So that is what is so exciting for New York City in particular.
Wonderful, wonderful. I completely echo those comments. You know, I can't help think of that old New Yorker magazine cover with New Yorker map of the world, and New York takes up 80% of the map, and then it's like California and France, and that's about it. So, so well said, Lisa, and thank you, David. So, you know, that's kind of the high level, and I like the word you use, liminal, Lisa. We still don't yet know how this is going to work. What do we think about? What do we know so far about what framework is in place? Tanisha, why don't you kick off that part of the conversation? I think we're looking to get into, you know, what do we know so far? And then we'll turn it over to Imani to get her thoughts as well. But Tanisha, kick us off there.
Not a problem. Thank you, Jeff. So again, Tanisha Walker-Miller, principal at Capalino. I head up the state lobbying for Capalino and have been following along on the issue of cannabis for quite some time. This is something that, you know, I have watched for over 7.5 years, and finally it's here. The legislation has passed, though there have been many before me, but finally we've gotten this done thanks to Senator Liz Krueger and Assemblywoman Crystal Peoples-Stokes. So kudos to them. And what we're looking at with the Marijuana Regulations and Taxation Act, which is known as MRTA, we're looking at a whole new agency being created as a result. The Office of Cannabis Management, which is now on the state website. Basically, what they are doing is creating a whole new agency to be able to tackle the questions and concerns that a lot of the businesses are going to be having in regards to marijuana, adult use, as well as medical use. They're also going to be creating a control board, which is actually going to be the board that's going to oversee the regulations and how the licenses will be distributed. So there's a lot of moving components to this. And one of the things that we want to make sure that everyone is aware of is that, you know, the licenses have not been distributed yet. We're still in the process of making sure that happens. We're hearing hopefully by January, licenses will be up and ready. The control board itself, it's still not up and ready yet. They have not appointed folks to the board just yet. So there's still a lot of moving pieces that are going to be happening within the next few months. And what we're going to be doing is monitoring that closely. So for all of you businesses that are looking to start the cannabis in terms of retail, distribution, processing, we will definitely keep you posted on where things are with that. One of the other key pieces to this that I want to bring up is that, you know, this legislation has been talked about for so long and has had so many different components to it that, you know, they really had to take a good hard look at the racial disparities, looking at the issues of expungement, you know, for those who have been impacted by, you know, carrying marijuana use, you know, carrying marijuana for stop and frisk. That was a big issue when it came to this legislation. Another piece to this is the impacts that it's had on the communities of color, especially those who've been harassed, those who, you know, who are not able to get jobs as a result of having a record. And for my colleagues, please feel free to jump in to jump in on this issue. But as a result, there is a social economic component to this legislation that was put in, which actually will put aside 50% of the licenses for small businesses, minority women businesses, to be able to apply for these licenses, because they too have an ability to play in the market of retail. They too have an ability to play in the market of delivery. They too have an opportunity to play in the process of agricultural as well as the dispensary piece. So that was a major component to this. Another major component to this, Jeff, and to my colleagues, is that the Office of Cannabis Management is also going to be making sure that, you know, the social and economic equity program is fully up and running. And part of that social equity program will be to make sure that there is going to be a piece of the licenses that will look to make sure that communities actually are given an opportunity to take part. So those who are looking to do retail will be able to take part in making sure that they're hiring folks from the communities that were impacted. They're also looking to make sure that folks who are looking to get into this industry will be able to have an opportunity to do trainings through some of the businesses to learn about the industry. So there's a lot of great components to this.
That's great.
Another piece that I wanted to bring up is the fact that the licensing application is going to be very detailed. So businesses need to be aware that it's not going to be a simple 2-page application. We're looking at this being possibly between a 15 to 35-page application. That's going to be quite intense, and that's going to require a lot of information in regards to how businesses are going to be started, who the partners are, where the money is going to be coming from to start these businesses, whether you're going to be having the social economic component to your process. All of that is going to be taken into consideration. And the other piece I just wanted to highlight is that with this legislation, which is very unique, we have a delivery license. The delivery license is going to be big here in New York because it's going to give an opportunity for small businesses to be able to participate in being able to deliver adult use marijuana through retailers. So that's going to be a big piece, that delivery service. I know there's going to be conversations about who's going to apply for that, what type of big companies are going to be applying for that. But just so you know that there are regulations that are put in place to limit exactly who can apply for the delivery license. So we can definitely go into that if there's folks who have questions about that a little bit later. The other piece that I want to bring up, to mention is that, the Safe Banking Act. That's another area that people have been talking about for a very long time. That's a piece that passed with the House. New York is definitely looking at, how that's going to trickle down and impact us here. So I just want to make sure that people keep an eye on the Safe Banking Act that got passed on the federal level, because that's going to be big here in New York.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tanisha. That's great. You touched upon a lot there. Really good, juicy stuff. You mentioned the equity program. You mentioned the standing up the regulations and regulatory. Imani, we talked a little bit about sort of what we want to see as these regulations and processes get stood up. We'd love to get your thoughts on that, and then maybe after Imani, Kristen, get your thoughts on the equity program a little bit more. Imani, tell us what we should be looking for.
Sure. Well, as someone who's the executive director of an education and advocacy program here, looking to help bridge gaps for communities most harmed in terms of health equity and access, and also economic opportunities, and an MWBE small business owner here working in communications and marketing, particularly around cannabis advocacy, I am particularly excited about our legislation, which I believe is the gold standard. Tanisha did a great job of describing some of the parts of the bill and what we can expect. And as someone who was amongst the coalition of advocates that supported Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes and Liz Krueger and their 8-year-long fight to legalize in an equitable way, I feel like the real opportunity here is to continue to, for us, is to continue to advocate to ensure that the regulatory framework that's created by the Cannabis Control Board and Office of Cannabis Management really follows the spirit of the legislation, that the leadership, in particular, the chair of the board, the executive director of the office, and the chief equity officer draft and promulgate the regulations with an eye towards equity. So they're going to make those regulations, they're going to issue all licenses, and they're going to ultimately enforce them. And what's important for me is making sure that the leadership that emerges is culturally competent. Ideally, it would be someone who obviously needs to understand the legal and regulatory framework and the complexities of regulating an industry that is not yet legal at the federal levels. We're kind of creating our own state level industry, but also understands the disproportionate impact that prohibition has had on communities of color in New York and around the country, is sensitive to that and really looks for innovative ways within the law to ensure that we have day one social equity, which is really what the bill intended, and that when we are creating this equitable industry, which we know, particularly for the plant touching roles, is going to have high capital needs, even if we're talking about a social equity license, that there is a clear and fair path for entrepreneurs who fit into that social equity category to take advantage of it, and it doesn't just become a way for exploitation or ultimately not living up to its promise because we haven't gotten the details right. It's really important that we get someone ideally that has a kind of advocacy background, because everyone has had to find themselves in an advocacy role in one way or another when it comes to the legal cannabis space, and understands just how inclusive the industry is because of the history of content of cannabis in the United States, and also for the future that we're trying to create.
That's great. I appreciate that. I'm just looking at the time, and I want to make sure we have time for some of those great questions that are already starting to roll in. Kristen, anything you want to share on the equity program? Any thoughts you have there?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be really brief in an overview in the interest of time. But I reiterate what Imani and Tanisha was saying earlier. We are so proud to have been part of the legalization effort, and I want to call out specifically Start Smart Coalition, led by the Drug Policy Alliance, specifically Chris Alexander, who was the first state director who essentially wrote the MRTA with the assistance of the coalition. And Melissa Moore, the current director at DPA, who led all of us activists in the fight and encouraged us to stand our ground on a number of issues, including homegrown, which I think doesn't get enough credit as being a social equity and economic equity issue. Access is always important, especially with a state so geographically spread out throughout the for our patients and our wellness consumers. But specifically, and I will try to be brief, the bill, the law now does list a stated goal of not less than 50% of adult use licenses to go to applicants who qualify under the social and economic equity application status. And that is just the benchmark. That's not to suggest that we can't do better than that. And I would expect that we will strive to do better than that. We are a state committed to instilling the most progressive policies around cannabis, and we will be the gold standard in this area specifically. I do want to call out the license types: micro business, delivery, and nursery licenses specifically have call outs for promotion of social and economic equity applicants. Now, obviously at this stage, we're not certain what that actually means. It could take, the semblance of what happened in Massachusetts, where the delivery licenses were set aside for social equity applicants. I think we have lessons to learn there. In certain municipalities, some of those licenses were stuck in litigation, and that the clock keeps ticking. So that impaired the ability for that 3-year window to give a head start. So I think we have some examples to really take a look at in our guidance for rolling this out in a productive way. But specifically, those specific licenses have been called out by this law in order to promote and continue promotion of social equity.
Love it, love it. Kristen, I may as well take this opportunity. There was a question out there. Do we have any sense of from the Q&A, any sense of the numbers and any sense of the timing of licenses? So questions on numbers and timing. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think everyone's being cautious. The appointments have not been made at this point, and we need the staff to be in place in order to roll out the regs. But I think we can take, by example, New Jersey. So what we're hearing from New Jersey and very publicly is that while the stated timeline puts the regs coming out in around August, they still have not finished their staffing either. And so the messaging that we're getting from New Jersey is that there are a number of things that have to be put in place to put that regulatory body in place before the regs can actually come out. So if I were to guess, I'd say the fall. Yeah, but that's just me.
That's really helpful. And everyone on the call, we all understand that we are trying to make projections with imperfect information. So so we will obviously keep on looking at that time frame, and and folks stay in touch with us as this progresses. I want to transition to another topic here, just in the interest of time. There were some great conversations with folks on this panel we had the other day on, this is not necessarily a new sector. It is new in the sense that it is now legal. It is sort of, legislated, but it has been going on. And so in that sense, there are legacy operators that have been operating in the cannabis sector. Some, like Melany, hemp and other products, and we'd love to get Melany's perspective, and then others on the retail and delivery side that would be more considered black market. So how does this new program impact those legacy operators? Melany, I want to first turn it to you for your perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. So like we were talking about the other day, the legacy market is built and has been built primarily off of trust, but at the same time, a lot of secrecy and intransparency. And that's where the trust really comes in. And so right now we have the opportunity to replace that secrecy with transparency, but also hold on to that trust and that and bring that forward into this new industry. And what that really means is that we can assign value to the places and the people who grow the cannabis. And that's where the social and environmental equity really merge as one. The more value we assign to New York grown cannabis that is soil grown, and the people and hands that are touching those plants, and value in the sense of how are we creating sustainable communities around the cultivation of cannabis? How are we including marginalized folks in urban and rural communities and giving them access to actually grow this crop as an agricultural commodity or as an agricultural plant, rather than something that's being isolated and almost further removed from the people by putting it, in only indoor facilities, which has really detrimental effects to our climate and greenhouse gas emissions. And we see that in Colorado, we see that across our country, where indoor cultivation of cannabis hasn't really posed an opportunity for cultivation and bringing it into an agricultural context. Instead, it's really caused a lot of a surge in energy use and a surge in greenhouse gas emissions that is pretty astronomical. So the more that we can assign a value to New York grown cannabis and the people and places that can grow this plant, the better off we are, and the more we can become global leaders in this new industry, and also put ourselves on a map as a destination as we discover the characteristics and taste and flavor profiles and medicinal and therapeutic qualities of New York grown cannabis.
Great, wonderful. That's really insightful, Melany. And we'll want to turn back to you in a minute on sustainability. You mentioned the sort of energy and the outputs that can be pretty detrimental. Imani, would love to get your thoughts on from a legacy to legal. I know you mentioned the other day that you were involved in convening an event dealing with that exact topic. What are your thoughts on how this impacts those that have been doing this for years?
Well, I think that the legislation is it presents an opportunity. Like, for example, having while we are absolutely working to expunge the records of folks who had their lives upended from nonviolent just possession convictions, in the interim, having a conviction does not preclude you from participating in the industry. So there is an opportunity, and I feel, based on the fact that I think maybe Lisa mentioned it before, that culturally we've had a market here, and that these folks have sustained it. We have a moral obligation, and also just a pragmatic one, to integrate them into our marketplace so that it doesn't, like, we don't start our legal adult use industry at odds and ultimately unsuccessful because we are competing for consumers. There is an opportunity to bring them in, to leverage their experience, their relationships, their knowledge, and also the markets that they've already created, and absorb it. And so the legacy to legal event that we did in conjunction with Chem, which is a global equity movement to make cannabis accessible to all people in the United States, was really designed to provide the first steps and a pathway into the industry, explaining, based on our knowledge now of what it will look like, things that people need to do to button up and get ready, the importance of advocacy, because again, the advocacy provided the foundation for our legislators to really be bold and innovative and create an industry that includes all of us and attempts to build a better future, in part by rectifying the harms of the past. So in having this event and in incorporating them, whether it's in a specific license, like a delivery license, or allowing them, facilitating them, tapping into the social equity framework that's being built out, it's really important that we give them a place at the table in a marketplace that they, you could argue they are responsible for creating for us.
Great. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's going to be so important that this not just block out a whole class of folks that have been doing this and have real expertise, as well as an existing customer base. So how do we pull them in as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel? Pivoting a little bit to, want to go back to Melany. I'm thinking of sustainability. I'm thinking of energy. Melany, I know you mentioned, sort of growing the cannabis crop outdoors versus indoors, but we'd love to get your thoughts on sustainability. And while we're at it, there's some great questions coming in. There are a few that we can tackle a little later when we talk about big players versus small players. So I'm thinking Peter and Arthur, Armand, we're gonna get to you. Yeah, what are your thoughts on sustainability, Melany? Whether it means how do you make our cannabis real estate sustainable, as well as our cannabis grow outdoors practice sustainable?
Yeah, so I am a huge supporter, and I urge everybody listening in to also look into the benefits of sun-grown outdoor cannabis. There's a lot more access points when we think about growing this plant in the soil under the sun rather than indoor. And for context, right now, agriculture accounts for 10% of greenhouse gas emissions in the USA. And to further that, a study that was conducted in Colorado shows that the greenhouse gas emissions of indoor cannabis cultivation actually exceeded coal mining in the state. And to even further that point, in combination with legal and illicit growing of cannabis, we are using 4.1 million megawatt hours of electricity annually. So to give context to that, that is the total amount of energy generated by the Hoover Dam. So this just really drives home the point of why growing this plant indoor causes actually a lot of harm to our planet, when instead we could be using this as an opportunity to have a new value added plant, and again offering a opportunity for more access points to grow this plant, because there's a lot more barriers to entry when we think about putting up the infrastructure for an indoor grow, rather than finding a piece of land in New York to grow cannabis. And we also need to think about the waste and the waste of growing indoor, given the fertilizer, the water, all of the inputs is much higher than when we grow outdoor, and we have more opportunity to create closed loop systems and to redirect waste streams to benefit your crop. So there's a lot we have on the table as far as moving this in the right direction, and it really comes down to the consumer having the education and the knowledge to really ask for and seek sun-grown cannabis, just like you would seek a more local or organic food item. And the more we can really normalize too the characteristics of outdoor grown cannabis versus indoor. I spoke a bit before about the idea that New York grown cannabis would have specific characteristics that were unique to the place and the people that touch that plant. And I think we can learn a lot from the wine industry and the idea of appellations of origin, and really assigning a specific values to certain regions in New York, and the flavor profile and therapeutic profile that is imparted based on the soil in which the plant was grown. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
No, wonderful, wonderful. I mean, you know, I'm thinking of the other kind of food and beverage products that are really tied to location, right? Like I think of, you know, Kentucky bourbon, or think of, you know, California Napa Valley or champagne that can only come from a specific region of France. You know, oysters have their terroir from, you know, being located in a certain part of the world and a part of the ecosystem. So really amazing ideas, Melany. And I want to start tackling a couple of these questions, some good questions that are out there. There's one question from Peter Schorsch. How will cultivation be supported, since cultivation needs much higher levels of funding? It takes 1 to 2 years to build and stand up. Any thoughts on that, on how this program may help folks that want to get into the cultivation side and are looking for support?
I would say look for hemp farmers. That's sort of a great entry point into the industry, because these are people that are already growing this plant, not the THC piece, but the CBD piece, and simply look at your community of farmers, because this is a value added crop. And the more we have farmers advocating for their right to grow this and add this to their crop rotation, I think the more we push forward the cannabis as an agricultural crop and not something that needs to be locked away in a facility and grown as though it were not natural.
Great. No, that's great. Really helpful, and certainly just your hemp growing background is really helpful expertise to leverage here. You mentioned the word normalize at some point, or normalizing outdoor grow, and obviously there'll be indoor, there'll be outdoor, but staying with that concept of normalizing cannabis, I guess in this sense, Lisa, would love to get your thoughts. There is still, at least in some circles, you know, perception that this is, You know, it's new, it's dangerous, it's out there, it's certainly novel in many respects, and what do we do? What are some of the ways to think about normalizing now that we've got a program that is you know, been legislated? What are your thoughts on how do we normalize this into our brands, into our business community, into our society?
Yes, well, I'll start with the fact that everybody in the cannabis industry often talks about the, you know, normalization and destigmatization of cannabis. And from where I sit, the way that's going to happen is through the partnerships with the well-established brands that we all know and are familiar with. And that will happen more and more. And I was saying yesterday that one example of normalization in action is an article that I have coming out in next month's Town and Country that I worked on with Melany. And it's about Hudson Hemp, right? And about their company. And that's normalization in action, because that's one of the oldest titles covering society, covering a company that has is producing cannabis-derived products. And who would have thunk, right? So that is just one example of that happening. Another I'd like to point out that actually comes up as my response to something that Melany mentioned, which is the on-site consumption licenses that are part of this, of the new laws. And I think that what is really interesting is that it's not only the city where people are thinking about this happening, where we're all talking about, yesterday, I think it came up in our conversation about the, you know, the third places that are going to be coming up, but also in the country. And there are, Melany, you must know about this too, the kind of towns that have had a little bit of a, you know, hit a bump in the road, and that will now be looking to start tasting rooms next to grows to encourage tourism, where from the cities and from other places that haven't had it before. I mean, that's another part of this evolution that's very exciting. That's going to bring economic development outside of the city to New York. I mean, that's just another piece of this that will be exciting as we move forward.
Absolutely.
And, you know, that's really something to look forward to. And the last piece that I wanted to mention in answer to question about normalization was something that Imani, you had brought up, which is really, well, you were speaking about it yesterday in terms of bringing people from the legacy market into MSOs, bringing their knowledge into the different companies, and creating a place for people to work within the framework of the new MSOs. And I think that because cannabis isn't just a cannabis industry product, right? It's going to be a wellness product, that there needs to be collaboration too between the legacy market and, I would say, companies that are going to be creating products from wellness industries. So it's going to be an interesting mix in terms of normalization and bringing together people from different backgrounds to normalize this product, this ingredient, this industry in a way that we just, you know, don't even know yet how that's going to work, but we can start to imagine now.
So that's a great segue into, I wanted to get some thoughts from Imani and possibly from Kristen also on the, you know, you mentioned the MSOs, and there's some questions in there also about the larger companies that have been more established, they've got more capital. Obviously, our program in New York is calling out a, you know, a percentage for social equity, but nonetheless, that's a question that keeps coming up. Of what role do we want the bigger companies to play? Are there risks? Are there upsides? Imani, want to share some thoughts on the more established corporates?
Sure. So I think when we consider our industry, to Lisa's point, that there are going to be potential entry points for the legacy market, for people from community most harmed at, in all sectors, whether we're talking about entrepreneurship or also as employees. And I think it is incumbent on everyone participating in an equitable industry to approach the industry from a spirit of inclusion. There are already companies in the space, like Cureleaf immediately comes to mind with their Rooted in Good program, where they are, as part of their corporate social responsibility efforts, engaging in outreach, diversity supplier programs to support minority and diverse entry into the space in a non-plant touching way. There are companies with training and outreach programs, and these are also ways that they can model what good corporate governance looks like. I mean, at the end of the day, we have an amazing framework, an amazing legal framework, but as an industry, we all have to be invested, and we all have to contribute to inclusion and lead the way through our own example. And I'm hopeful that companies will realize that they can do well and do good at the same time, and to promote education and outreach to communities that are most harmed and help everyone have a seat at the table.
So, Kristen, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is going to sound controversial or not, but I almost think we talk so much about the MSOs and the big ROs, specifically in New York, and really the attention should be paid on the state. The state is the actor that put our folks in jail. The state is the one that harasses and over polices our communities. The state is the one who is in a position to offer low interest and no interest loans, and to really get a program up and running. I think to reiterate and to buttress what Imani was saying, absolutely, these big players should look at their corporate social responsibility as it pertains to the industry and the promotion of the objectives of the bill, like New York. However, it's the state that can offer and afford to, really achieve the goals that they've put in front of us. They have the mechanisms, they have the ability to do so and to turn these on. And so I would much rather have this conversation be about the small businesses, the small owners, and how we can continue to support them, rather than to put all that weight on the MSOs and the ROs. Let's have a conversation about how we create these pathways.
That's a great comment, and about what is the state doing, not only to fix what retroactively they've done wrong, but to sort of proactively moving forward, help these businesses, particularly the smaller ones. There's a question out in the Q&A from Eric McFadden. How does the law impact access to capital for MWBE companies? Kristen, you mentioned a little bit about loans, and Tanisha and Imani, I know that you are both experts in the MWBE space, but who wants to take a stab at answering Eric's question? Access to capital for MWBE companies.
I mean, practically speaking, we've seen MWBE businesses have, problems accessing capital in traditional markets, much less, a federally prohibited nascent industry. And so I don't think that we're going to see too much change unless and until the Safe Banking Act passes, until we deal with 280E as an issue. The state is proposing low interest and no interest loans, but where's that money going to come from? I mean, we really actually have to see, what I don't want to see happen is for this to be a day two situation where we're waiting for the first round of applicants to get that pool of cash, because that puts people at a disadvantage. And clearly we're already starting from that position because we have medical operators, 10 of whom who are entrenched and have, supply chains established. And, as unsuccessful as the medical program is, it's a launching pad. So to have, all these companies with a head start already, we've got a lot of catching up to do if we're going to achieve the goals of this progressive bill.
That's great.
Can I just
I'll
jump in really
I was
quickly and
just going
say,
to jump in real quick and just say that, all of the qualifications for the social, and economic application process has not been fully flushed out. That's going to be flushed out by the control board, the Cannabis Control Board, and the advisory board once they're put in place. So they're going to play a major role in looking at exactly how this zero interest loans are going to be put in place through conversations with state, as well as conversations with the city, and the money that's coming in from the federal government, how that's going to play a role for MWBEs as well in this space. So a lot of that is going to be a conversation that needs to happen, and needs to happen soon, as Kristen was saying, so we don't end up in that situation with applications being submitted and folks looking for money and there's no zero interest loans available. We don't want to see that happen. So I was just going to say that, this is definitely something that, in the MWBE community, we can definitely start having more conversations on and raising the awareness of it, so that those who are being appointed to the control board and the advisory board are aware that this is an issue that needs to be, rectified before the applications come out. Imani?
and thank you, Tanisha. As an MWBE business owner myself, I can tell you that there are, even within the program, there are disparities and gaps, and there's an opportunity to make it and our initiatives more equitable. What I would urge anyone who is an MWBE or a small business owner that is interested in cannabis is, while the state is perfecting its process of making it more equitable and allowing access to capital, providing capital, whether that's grants or loans, creating incubators to help, foster small business, to take your existing skill set and look at the industry, educate yourself, and figure out what an entry point for you would be. Because even though the plant touching part is the sexiest and the part that we think about the most, the reality is that the ancillary businesses supporting that are probably where the industry is going to be the most profitable. So if you, for example, are a communications and marketing person, you can be looking at how you bring those skills into the industry. And we have to take a real clear-eyed and pragmatic approach to entry, so that we don't have to see the cost of application fees and the cost of creating gathering capital to enter on the plant touching side as barriers that are uncrossable. You don't have to take a $500,000 investment. You can take what you're doing already and apply it to the industry.
I
That's
was
great.
just going
Thank
to
you,
say
Imani.
too, one last piece is that, as an MWBE, don't think that, you're going to be hindered. Look at this as an opportunity, on a larger scale. Getting into the retail aspect is going to be key as well. Looking at, technology, that's going to be key. Creating software, because the tracking systems that are going to be needed to be able to track the transportation, of adult use cannabis for delivery service is going to be, big here in New York. Looking at security, a lot of these companies are going to need security. So if you are an MWBE within that sector, these are areas that, there's opportunities for you. Also looking at it from, as Imani was saying, the marketing. If you're in the advertisement space, labeling is going to be key for a lot of these companies when it comes to marketing their products. Though there are some current, regulations that, prohibit, billboard advertisements for cannabis, there's still the marketing piece, for the products themselves, on the labeling side, that still MWBEs can play a major role. So there's still that piece of this. And then in terms of, the fact that we will have opportunities for, eateries where folks with the cafes, that's going to be a major piece to this too. So I don't want minority women businesses to think they can't play a role from the retail side. And then from the grow side, there are a lot of women businesses that are starting to grow upstate right now that are in the growing process. So please please think of them when you're thinking about finding a grower, you know, because warehouses and distilleries are going to need, you know, contacts upstate. Look at some of the women businesses that have started already. There are minority women and there are women businesses. So there are opportunities out there. It is not just the big guys anymore. We're in this to win it too.
Yeah, well said, well said. We're getting some, we've had a few questions. I think both Tanisha and Imani, you kind of touched upon the ancillary business ecosystem, right? Like it's very sexy to actually have the flower in your hand and whether it's retail, but there's a lot of stuff that supports those kinds of businesses. Key amongst that is banking, right? And financial institutions and financing partners. I'm seeing a bunch of questions in here about banking. Someone asked before, tell us a little bit more about the Safe Banking Act. William Peterson is asking, you know, is the state going to provide a backup deposit insurance plan? Someone else before mentioned how they had to change their banks numerous times. So would love to get some thoughts or comments on short-term and medium/long-term solutions to banking and financing challenges.
Well, I would say right now, local community banks are going to be playing a major role when it comes to this. Right now, you know, on the federal level, you know, our president is not a big supporter of cannabis. So it's going to still be a lot of conversations happening on the federal level in regards to the full passage of the bill. But on a local level here in New York, you know, the local community banks are going to be playing a major role. And there's also going to be a lot of questions about how our retailers are going to be able to do their transactions. You know, that's going to be a big issue here in New York. So we'll definitely be rolling out a lot of information of what to do and what not to do on that soon.
And then to the question, is the state ready to provide a backup deposit insurance plan? My feeling is that we haven't seen that, but do folks agree, or is it too early to say?
There's been some conversations, but they haven't rolled anything out just yet on that aspect of it. I think once, you know, the boards are really put in place and the CCB is fully up and operational with the executive director, that will be a topic of conversation that will be fully flushed out. But right now it hasn't been. And just keep in mind too, it's still a little early for us compared to New Jersey and some of the other states. We're still in the crawl, not even the crawling stage, the rolling stage of this process. So, but we are going to get there. And these are great questions that are being asked. And these are questions that we definitely will be taking note of to make sure that we follow up on and keep an eye on it and send out information as it comes out.
Tanisha, you're giving me flashbacks of my early parenting years. Which I was hoping I would forget. Let's see. I want to tackle some other questions, and then we just have a couple minutes. But we're getting some questions about social and economic equity. What is the state? I'm looking at Armand Adams' question. License fees, and what does it take to be considered a sort of social and economic? I'm thinking there's equity, social and economic equity. Applicant. Going back to Peter Schorsch, sort of what happens when your business, if it's in cultivation, takes a couple of years to stand up. So I think the broader question is like, do we know anything about who is going to be determined to be a social and economic equity applicant? What kind of supports do we think we'll see? I know it's super early, but anyone have thoughts on what we think we might see or what we want to see?
Well, I'll just jump in really quickly. I know that those provisions were designed to support people who are from communities that were most harmed. And I think when we are building out the regulations, have an opportunity to provide more clarity around that. I think that there are many people that can make a compelling argument, whether you currently reside in that community or a community like that, or you're originally from a community like that, if you have a parent that was incarcerated perhaps, or you yourself were subject to incarceration as a result of prohibition. So I would say that the best thing anyone could do at this point is to educate themselves, take a look at the bill, read it, educate themselves about the industry itself, and to also just to be active and to ensure that as we build out our industry, which is, as we talked about earlier, is happening now. We're at a point where the state is looking to select its leadership, that we are vocal about the kinds of leaders that we want to see. We'd like equity to be as inclusive and defined with the broadest possible brush because of, you know, the cultural impact of prohibition over almost 100 years.
Great. That's super helpful, Imani. I see we just have about a minute left, so maybe we can do one more question here. I see there are a lot of detailed questions, and I'm kind of afraid to go into those because in terms of very specifics, I don't think we know a lot of these sort of very specifics. You know,
Jeff,
someone asked a question. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
may I add? So in my world, as an attorney and as a real estate professional, what I'm being asked, especially in New York and New Jersey, is whether or not to secure my real estate and what the next step is. And I'm seeing a lot of brokers and a lot of leasing attorneys who are saying yes. I'm here to tell you, I don't agree with that at all. The regulations are not out. We do not know which towns or communities are going to opt in or out. We do not know what the requirements are going to be for safety. We have some guidelines certainly from other states, but New York stands alone, and our considerations and the way that we think and feel and live is completely different. So I would caution anyone who is signing a lease to put that on hold. At this stage, if you've identified real estate under the LOI, I think you need to have a conversation with the owners, because once you go to lease, then the lender on the building is going to get involved. And if you only have an LOI, which is likely the only thing that you're going to need for your license application, then you won't have that knowledge about whether or not the mortgage lender is going to accept you as a final tenant until after you've received that license, which is not a good position to be in. So at this stage, what I'm advising folks who are interested in this area is to, number one, figure out what your license type is. What are you chasing? Build your team. Figure out which community you want to be in. Start going to, if you're in New York City, start going to the community board meetings. Find out what the appetite is for cannabis businesses in your area. Start educating folks. Use resources like the Asian Cannabis Roundtable. We have doctors and professionals who can come and speak to your communities to help them get educated about what this is, not only as a medicine and a wellness tool, but also as a opportunity for generational wealth opportunities for your communities. So setting that up right away, figuring out what your funding source is. We've talked a lot about the lack of ability for MWBEs to access and find resources. So getting those things up and running and figured out, your entity formation, your partnership agreement, your exit strategies, all these things I would advise is worthy of, number one, your capital. So investing in professionals who understand this space, not somebody who hung up a shingle yesterday and is claiming to be a cannabis professional, but folks who actually understand this space and getting yourself set up. But I would caution anyone who is telling you to secure your real estate.
Is there any repository of this information? Like, I've seen harem scarum. Some towns say that they're opting out already, but it's like catch as catch can. Is there anybody, like any central reporting going on for this?
So the municipalities have until December 31st to fully opt out. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is monitoring where, for example, in Nassau County, where this is going to be happening, because that's where the biggest conversations are happening. And once that comes out, we will definitely be posting a lot of this information, to our networks as well. And I agree with Kristen 100%. This is the time where folks really have to learn to monitor themselves and be cautious when it comes to this industry and making sure they're not, you know, being taken to the bank, as they say. So I would definitely say, you know, keep an eye out on the information that's coming out and where it's coming from, because that's going to be very, very important for folks that are trying to get into the industry for the first time. You know, follow information that's coming from us at Capalino, follow stuff that's coming from Kristen, follow stuff that's coming from Imani, Lisa, you know, Melany, David, you know, Jeff, because we're the ones that are really out there that's been lobbying on this issue, that have been tracking this information, and we're not going to steer you wrong when it comes to this information. And for those of you who are looking to get into the retail space, you know, when it comes to whether or not you could be on the first floor, second floor, third floor, we'll definitely be putting information out about that. So stay tuned for that information, because it is coming, and a lot of this will come once the Office of Cannabis Management is fully up and operational. It is not fully up and operational right now, so we caution you to make sure that you're doing your homework, you're starting your businesses, get your information put in place, get your portfolios together, make sure you're tracking where your money is coming from, because all of that information is going to be asked on the applications. And that's going to be important information that you need to be able to know in order to do it. So please sign up for our weekly newsletters that are out there. Kristen, put yours in the chat. You know, Capalino's on is, please put it in the chat and follow us, and we'll definitely make sure that you get the information. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Tanisha, and Kristen. You really hit a home run on your comment there on the real estate side. Thank you so much. I mean, could not agree with you more. And I think so many people are wondering that question of like, hey, you know, legislation's live. Should I run out there? It's like the gold rush mentality: run, and do. And I love your advice, which is, hey, let's put some thought into it. What do we know? What do we not know? There's a lot you can still do. You can do that groundwork. You can do that community work. You can pay attention. As Tanisha said, you can keep your eyes and ears open and be plugged into good resources like Capalino, like Kristen, like Asian Cannabis Roundtable, like Imani's organization, like David, like Melany, who's been, you know, working in this space for years, like BPCM Cannabis. Where unfortunately we are out of time. I do want to say that it's really exciting to be talking about this topic, because there's so much and it's so new. There's going to be so much to talk about. So for everyone out there, stay tuned for future announcements. We're going to have Future of New York series on cannabis and other topics, but certainly we plan to do at least another one about cannabis. We're going to be doing a Future of New York panel about the June mayoral primary. That'll be coming up pretty soon. For our listeners, folks that have tuned in today, please sign up for the newsletters. You know, Kristen put her information out there. We put our Capalino information, but sign up, stay in touch with these great organizations and great businesses, and be a part of the community. It's a great way to keep learning information. Our website at Capalino is capalino.com. You can sign up there for more information. I want to thank the whole panel. Lisa, again, I want to thank you so much for all of your effort in pulling us together and recruiting and really leveraging your network. And for all the panelists who made time today, really appreciate it. For folks at home, office, who are logging in to check this out, really appreciate you making the time today. Let's stay in touch. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your information and your insights, and have a wonderful day.